Men, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Time to Man Up podcast. I'll tell you what, we are ready to go here today, men. I mean, we are going to be talking about those times in life when you just have a bad day. And so knowing that kind of talking about your bad days might be a little discouraging, I've got a man candle burning on in here, a mahogany teak wood. And so if you're just listening, then I guess you can't enjoy the warmness of the mahogany teak wood candle. But man, it's smelling good in here. And we're going to be taking on a challenging thing today, because when we look at having a bad day, men, we can get slammed. But before we get started, I just want to remind you to make sure to visit us at www.timetomanup.com and check out what we have available there. We've got some shirts that are available. We've got some different opportunities. Even if your church would like to order Man Up shirts, we can do it where we do it in a color of a shirt you would like, with the logo and a color that you would like. We can work that out. And if you can't figure it out on our website, just reach out and contact me. And that's at contact@timetomanup.com. And we will do what we can to help you. But you can get on there and you can download, you can purchase, I guess I would say, for the lowest price ever known to man. And that is free. You can download Session 1 of the Man Up study, Becoming the Man God Desires You to Be, especially as it comes near the end. Summer's coming and you're going to be gearing up for next fall. Make sure to get on there and check that out, and also share that with your pastor, your men's ministry leader. But help us get the word out, because it is so important that churches are reaching out to the men, not just in their church, but in their community. And in this day and age, we really need that. So, man, take advantage of this, guys. Get on there and check it out. And again, free Session 1. So have you ever had a bad day? Sometimes it feels like it's not just a bad day. It's a bad month. It's a bad year. I mean, I'm not talking that day when your car breaks down, or maybe it won't start for you northerners in the winter when it's cold outside, and you're like, don't mention that. Come on, we're trying to get to summer, right? And so, but maybe you're trying to do a home repair and something goes wrong with that. I was just telling somebody recently, I am not a handyman, and YouTube makes me dangerous, because I can get on YouTube and I can see how a project is done, and it makes me dangerous. Now, when we lived up in Michigan for 6 years, and I was a senior pastor up in the Michigan area, I decided we had a bi-level home. And in the winter, you needed to seal your sliding doors out the back, because cold air would just come. I mean, it was just, in the winter, it was freezing cold downstairs, and we had a dog. And so we had to let the dog out. But what I decided to do was, so that we could seal those sliding doors in the winter, I decided to build a door out the back of the garage that went into the backyard. It seems really easy when you just say, I'm going to put a door out the back of our garage. But I did not realize all the details, like cutting out the siding, being able to cut through the wall. And a major important thing is to brace the upper floor so that you don't have things shifting or falling down on you. And lo and behold, I tried to do it on my own. I was like, I'm not going to ask for help. I'm going to do this on my own. And a friend called me and goes, hey, how's your project going? I said, it's going really good. And he goes, well, did you brace the area where you're cutting out the door? And I'm like, well, no. Do I need to do that? And he says, yeah. And fortunately, he got me before I had gone too far in that process. And I put the door in. It fit perfect. And I'm like, I don't want to take this out because it fit so perfect. But then I had to. I wanted to insulate around it and do some different things. That project turned out okay. But there have been other projects that I've worked on that seemed like these very simple projects that went wrong. And when a project at home goes wrong, that usually means a lot of time, a lot of frustration, and a lot more money spent on it than you ever expected to spend on it. But I'm not talking about those kind of bad days. I'm talking about the bad days when your circumstances are so overwhelming, you just don't know how you're going to survive. You do not know how you're going to get not just to the next day, but to the next hour, to the next minute. And the loss is seemingly so great that you wonder, how do I bear this loss? How do I get through there? And I'm pretty confident that most of you that will listen to this have been to a place in your life where you felt that way. And why I decided to take this on today, I had a total different plan, but why I chose to take this on today is because as I've been reading through the Bible, or perhaps I should say listening through the Bible, it's been in chronological order. And so came to Job, and my goodness, most people, even if they don't know the Bible well, they've heard of Job. They know that his life just got turned upside down. And came to Job chapter 1 and have been making my way through Job. And in Job chapter 1 and Job chapter 2, when he has a bad, we'll call it a day, but it was more than a day. This went on and it went on and it went on, and it felt like probably it would never end. And then through the process, you've got friends piling up on you. You've got your wife piling up on you. I mean, it is a downright mess. And it's crazy to think of what Job had to go through. But it's always interesting when I think about how this started. When you think about this, Job's situation started because like Satan is wandering about and he finds himself there. God starts talking to him. He goes, "Hey, what are you up to?" I'm just wandering around. And in Job chapter 1, verse 8, God says this to Satan: "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Man, guys, we've talked about this before, but thanks, God. Thanks for bringing my name to Satan's mind. And Satan acknowledges and he says, "You know what? Oh, Job, yeah, he's that guy you've been blessing. He's that guy you've put a hedge around and you've been protecting him." And so Satan knew exactly who he was talking about. And he acknowledges him for that guy that God has been protecting. And then God responds this way to Satan in verse 12. "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan leaves the presence of God and he's giddy, right? I mean, he's like, okay, this dude that's been protected by you, you've put a hedge around him. I'm bringing it down on him, right? I'm bringing the pain. Job is about to enter a bad day. A bad day that probably it's hard to find someone who has had a bad day as bad as Job is going to have. So the result of this first conversation with Satan and God is that Satan goes and he begins to rain down his bad day on Job. And in this process, I mean, we've got servants coming to Job and they're reporting into him. And we find that Job loses servants and oxen and donkeys because they're raided and these animals are stolen, servants are killed, and only one servant escapes, and he goes to tell Job about it. And then Job loses his sheep and his servants that are out watching his sheep, and he had a lot of sheep, and he loses them. And what happens again? One servant survives, so he can get back to Job and say, "Hey, Job, just wanted to tell you, You've lost all your servants and you lost your sheep, and I was just fortunate enough to get out of there. And then another guy comes to report in. By this time, I mean, man, after you've had those two reports, you're thinking, what else could go wrong, right? Never ask God, can it get any worse, right? Because you might find that out that it can, and Job did. Because this next servant comes and he says, you've lost all your servants and your camels. So now he's losing basically every possession that he has, he's losing. And then the fourth servant comes and he says, hey, your kids were all getting together for a party. And Job knew that. He was praying for him. He was saying, God, protect them for decisions they're going to make. You know, he was praying for him. And he says, the wind came in and the four pillars of the house collapsed and all your kids died. 7 sons and 3 daughters, they died. Now I'm telling you, when I look at a bad day, those first 3 I can get through. I can be like, yeah, just possessions. It's all right. We'll roll with it. But when you lose your 7 sons and 3 daughters, I mean, it's like this. If you've ever been a parent and your kid has been in an accident, you could care less about the car. You're more worried about your child that was in that accident, and you want to make sure they were okay. The car you can deal with later on, and you can replace a car, but you want to know, is my child okay? So Job gets these words, and he finds out things have fallen apart. I've lost pretty much everything. And to be honest, the way his wife comes at him, he might have wished that he lost his wife too, because she is on him. She's like, dude, you need to repent. You've messed up. You've done something to cause this. And got his wife coming at him, got his friends coming at him. But before we get to that, in Job chapter 2, here we got it again. Satan's roaming about. God sees him. They begin to interact. And he says this in verse 3, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. And you say, well, how did that happen? Well, it was fire from God that rained down on his sheep and his servants that wiped him out. Satan cannot do anything without God allowing it. And to be honest, guys, when we go through difficult times in life, when things get tough, it's hard to come to that realization that none of that happens without God allowing it. And that's tough. And that's where Job is right now. I mean, God has allowed these things to happen. And Job continues to stay faithful to God. And Satan's like, yeah, but God, you're still protecting him. You didn't let me mess with Job. If you would have allowed me to mess with him, he surely would have turned on you. He would have been ticked off at you. And so God says, okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to let you touch him. I'm going to let you impact him. And when we think about that God was going to, or God was going to allow him to impact on Job's physical body, and that's exactly what he does, right? Job is there. Job has sores on his body. He's scraping it with little pieces of pottery, and it's messed up. It's miserable, and he is struggling with life. And Satan isn't holding back. So Job, the book of Job, contains chapter after chapter after chapter of his interactions with so-called friends and with God. But in the end, and we're skipping 40 plus chapters here, but in the end, God blesses him with twice as much as he had before. He gives him, again, 7 sons and 3 daughters. And what's interesting is I don't know what kind of lookers the three daughters were that passed away, that died when the house fell, but the passage says that they were the most beautiful ladies in all the land. And he gives those three daughters inheritance, which wasn't the norm in that culture. Usually the guy got the inheritance. And so the daughter who married into another family would get the inheritance of that son that she married. So you have this situation where God doesn't just give him back what he had, he gives him better than what he had. Now, does that mean that Job left this situation and he never felt sadness for the 10 children he lost? No way. You don't just move on from that. And that was something that he would have remembered. But what happens is he is able to then be blessed by God. He remains faithful to him, but I guarantee you that was tough. But that's not what I want to focus on in this episode. I want to take us back to chapters 1 and chapter 2 of Job, because I want you to see his response to one of the worst days ever that someone has ever had. And it's hard for me to say days because I almost need to say like weeks and months. And I mean, this was just some tough junk he's dealing with. But in chapter 1, verses 20 to 22, it says this in verse 20, "Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground." Okay, that's what we would expect. He's mourning. He falls on the ground. He's tearing his clothes, right? But it adds 2 words at the end of this verse that as I was making my way through Job, it just got my attention. So it says he's doing all this grieving process, but at the end of it, it says he fell on the ground and worshiped. How often when you are going through a bad day, a bad week, a bad month, a bad year, do you think in the midst of your mourning, in the midst of your grief, to worship God? And that's what Job did. And he makes this statement in verse 21. He says, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return." Right? When you're born, you have nothing. When you die, you take nothing. So he says, I had nothing from the beginning, and I'm not going to have anything in the end. And he makes this statement, and this is the one that, man, guys, we got to remember this. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. The Lord gave him all of those possessions. The Lord gave him those 10 children. But he says, who am I to question it when the Lord takes those things back, when he takes them away from me? And he says this, the Lord gives, the Lord takes. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in verse 22, in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Job understood it. He only had because God gave him. And at any time, God had the right, the authority to take that back. But it wasn't going to change the fact that he would bless the name of the Lord. Guys, that's a hard reality to come to. That's tough to bless the Lord when things are difficult. And then we jump into chapter 2, verses 9 through 10, and now he's been personally attacked by Satan. And here is what his wife says to him. His wife says to him in verse 9, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." I mean, she looks at Job and she says, he's in bad shape. I mean, it says his friends didn't even recognize who it was because he was in such a bad shape. And if you've seen someone that's experienced the worst day of their life, sometimes they're unrecognizable because the grief, the anguish, it just wears on them. And here's what Job responds to his wife. He says to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak." Now, I thought, man, that could go wrong in so many ways, right, men? If you're a husband and your wife was questioning you, now hopefully she wasn't saying curse God and die, but if you responded and said you speak as one of the foolish women would speak, how would she respond to you? But then he says to her, shall we receive good from God? And shall we not receive evil? And it says, in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Men, if you think following Christ is easy, you are wrong. It drives me insane when people will tell new believers, you know what? It's the best decision you will ever make. That's true. And life will be so easy. God will give you everything you need. Dude, how long have you been a believer? What have you been doing? Just sitting in the pew watching? Because when you follow Christ, ask any of the disciples, when you follow Christ, things get tough. If Christ suffered, why would we expect anything different? Even Jesus himself said, listen, the world hates me. And if it hates me, it's going to what? Hate you. We know that that's the challenge that we face. Now, few times in my life have I ever felt like I was having the worst day of my life. But when I did, it feels like it went far more than just a day, right? Sometimes it would go for a while. And even recently, man, I've been like the past 2 years, it's like I've spent a long time in the wilderness trying to figure out what God is doing. And in all honesty, I'm still trying to figure out what in the world God is doing. It's like as I follow him, and you've got doors and multiple hallways of your life, and you try to go through those doors, and then he shuts it, and he shuts another one, and you think, where do you want me to go? There are no other doors. And God has a plan. We know that. We know that he is faithful. We know that he'll take care of us. But sometimes when you are going through that bad day, that bad week, that bad year, you begin to wonder, God, do you really have this under control? That's why Job's response is so amazing, because when he's responding that way, you think, man, if anybody had the right to be angry at God, Job had the right. But why is it that we don't get that God gives and God can take? It's all his. We'll tell people, you know what? Your money is all God's. And like when we're living well, when we've got all the money that we need, we're like, yeah, this is all God's. Thank you, Jesus. And then all of a sudden we don't have it. I mean, when I stepped away and started 2 businesses, let me just tell you this, I haven't got a paycheck in a year and a half. And in working through this, it's like, you know what, God? I liked it a lot better when I was getting a paycheck, when I was working and actually got something for that work, rather than putting in a lot of hours and no compensation for it. But I've got to be willing to understand that when I had, it was God's, and when I don't have, it's still God's, and he knows exactly what's going on. Now, one of my favorite hymns is It Is Well, written by Horatio Spafford. And I remember, I was always like, that's an amazing story, and we'll talk a little bit about it. But then I began to dig in a little bit about Horatio Spafford, and I was like, okay, he wasn't this great guy that I expected that he was. Because when you ask most people, they think Horatio Spafford was the greatest godly man. Well, I'm telling you, you've got the web, you can search, and there's some junk that he was into. Even theologically, he was skewed in a lot of areas. But he was a lawyer in Chicago, friends with the evangelist D.L. Moody. So he had circulating friends that he knew important people. And in his time in Chicago, he was successful as a lawyer, and he would experience not just a bad day, but a bad day that continued and continued and continued for basically a couple years that he was dealing with the situations of life. So what's interesting is he had invested heavily in real estate along Lake Michigan shoreline of Chicago. He had put a lot of his earnings into that real estate properties. And in 1871, if you are familiar with that, and Chicago, that was when the Great Chicago Fire happened and massive loss took place. And Horatio Spafford lost pretty much everything. Like all of the properties that he had bought were gone. And what was amazing is this was just kind of it would have felt like God was piling on, because just a little bit before that, he had lost his son to scarlet fever. So losing his son to scarlet fever and then losing everything except your family in the fire. And then as things were going on and they were trying to recover, they decided that they just needed some time to get away. And so a little while later after that, in November of 1873, Horatio Spafford sends his wife and 4 daughters to England. And back then, you got on a boat and you took a trip across the ocean. So he puts them on that boat. He sends his family away, and he has some business dealings that he has to take care of. So as they board the ship and they head to England, and he says, bye, see you in a few days, little did he know that that would be the last time that he would ever see his daughters, right? He loses a son because of scarlet fever, and then he puts his daughters and wife on, and as their boat is going across to England, it is hit by another boat. The boat sinks, and there were only a few survivors, and his wife survived, and his 4 daughters died. I can't imagine that wife and the situation that she faced of being the only survivor. But when Horatio Spafford hears this, he immediately boards a boat, and he heads to England to be rejoined with his wife and connect with her. And as he's going across the ocean, they come to the place where supposedly that accident had happened, where his 4 daughters had died. And it is at that site where he pins the words to "It Is Well." And it's interesting because I just want to read the first verse to this. And it says, when peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. In the middle of having a bad day, Horatio Spafford was saying, God, I understand that you give, and I understand that you take. Why did he know that? Because God had given him a son and taken that son. God had given him these possessions of buildings, and God had taken them away. God had given him these 4 daughters, and God had taken them away. So to be able to say it is well, he's there where he has experienced such great loss. Are you at a place, men, in your life where you are able to say it is well? Whatever that struggle that you are dealing with, whatever you are facing, that bad day, life in Christ is not easy. And sometimes it can feel, men, that God is nowhere to be found. Sometimes you may even find yourself doubting his word, right? I mean, you pray and you find no answers. And you're like, well, God, you said if I just ask, you'll answer. You seek him and you don't find him. You don't find that opening that you've been looking for. You pause, you listen, you are still, and you don't hear his voice. So you begin to wonder, is God even there? Does God even care? Now, what I will say is this: we know God is there, but sometimes it just doesn't feel like it. And we would love to see the big picture of, God, why did I have to go through these tragedies? Why did I have to experience these personal losses? What was your purpose? Because often when we can discover purpose for what we have gone through, all of a sudden that makes it worthwhile more. But Job reminds us, men, bad days are going to come. And when those bad days come, remember that God gives and God takes away. And we have to make the decision to understand that. We have to make the decision to do what Job did when he said, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." Men, are you able to give God praise for those bad days? Choosing joy is easy when God gives what you're asking for. When God provides for you, it's easy to have joy. But choosing joy when God takes away, choosing joy when you have that bad day, when things get tough, is difficult. But Job 121, the Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Guys, that's what I want to leave you with. When you have that bad day, when things don't seem to be going well, I just want you to turn to God. And that can be closing your eyes. That can be looking up, whatever way you look to God. Say, "God, blessed be your name. I don't know why you gave this and then you took it away. But blessed be your name." And men, you know, as well as I know, that can be so hard to do. And that's why you have to be able to man up, to do the man thing and recognize that if it's going to be great when God's giving, you've got to choose joy when he's taking, and bless his name, man. Guys, it's time. It's time to man up. Have a great day.